and the heavy glass doors of First National Bank's flagship branch on Peachtree Street swung open at 9:15 a.m., and admitting a rush of humid Atlanta air and one quiet figure who seemed to belong to another world entirely. Evelyn Hayes, 70, 4 years old, and stepped inside with the measured pace of someone who had long ago learned not to hurry for anyone. Her deep brown skin carried the rich patina of a Georgia lifetime, and sun-baked cotton fields in her youth, factory shifts in the 70s, church suppers every Sunday since. She wore a faded floral dress, hemmed and rehemmed over decades, and a thin gray shawl draped across her shoulders against the air conditioning, and an old cloth handbag that had once held school lunches for her children, and in her right hand rested a sturdy wooden cane, its tip worn smooth from years of faithful service. The lobby was a polished hive of morning commerce, and white executives in tailored suits checked watches and barked into earpieces. White women in pastel blouses tapped credit cards on marble counters. Tellers, and mostly young and white, smiled brightly at familiar faces, while their eyes slid past anyone who didn't match the expected profile. Evelyn moved toward the nearest window, and cane tapping softly against the floor. No one offered a seat on the leather benches. No one met her gaze. Instead, a low ripple of whispers followed her like smoke, and at counter 3 stood Ryan Thompson, 28, blonde hair neatly conned, tie knotted with casual precision, and he was mid-scroll on his phone when Evelyn set her passbook down with gentle care. "Good morning, young man," she said, voice soft but clear, and carrying the warm lilt of the South. "I'd like to make a withdrawal, please. $50,000 in cash." Ryan's eyes flicked up, then down again, quick inventory, and dark-skinned simple dress, cane, age. His mouth curved into something between a smirk and a sneer. He didn't touch the passbook. "Mom, and this isn't the welfare office," he said, loud enough for the next customer in line to hear. "We handle real accounts here. You sure you're in the right place?" And Evelyn's fingers tightened on the cane. "I've banked here since before you were born, son. Please just look at the book." Ryan laughed, a short, sharp bark. "And since before I was born. In that dress? Come on now." He leaned forward, voice dropping to mock concern. "Look, we get people wandering in sometimes and thinking this is a check cashing spot or whatever. But 50 grand. That's not happening. You need to leave before I call security." Heads turned, and a white woman in a navy blazer clutched her purse tighter and stepped back. A man in golf shirt khakis muttered, "Typical," under his breath. No one intervened, and the commotion drew branch manager David Ellis from his glass office. 52, pale, neatly bearded, accustomed to deference, and he approached with the stride of someone who believed the bank belonged to him personally. "What's the problem here?" he asked Ryan, and though his eyes were already fixed on Evelyn with undisguised appraisal. "This lady says she wants 50,000 cash," Ryan replied, rolling his eyes, "and claims she's a regular. Look at her, sir. She's clearly confused or worse." Ellis studied Evelyn the way one might examine an item left on the lost and found shelf. "And, Mom, we don't tolerate loitering or solicitation in this branch if you don't have legitimate business." "I have legitimate business," Evelyn said quietly, "and my passbook is right there. 23 years of direct deposits, savings, everything." Ellis glanced at the passbook without picking it up, "And I'm not opening that until you show ID that matches. And frankly, you don't look like someone who keeps that kind of balance here." The words landed like stones, and Evelyn's shoulders sagged a fraction, but her chin stayed level. "My ID is in my bag, I can—" "No need," Ellis cut in. "Security." 2 guards, one white, one black, and appeared almost instantly. They flanked Evelyn without a word. The white guard took her left arm, the black guard hesitated half a second before taking the right, and they pulled her toward the exit. Her cane slipped from her fingers and clattered across the marble. She stumbled once, caught herself on the edge of a planter, but they didn't slow. At the threshold they pushed, firm, not violent, but final. Evelyn staggered onto the sidewalk, knees buckling, and she caught the railing just in time to keep from falling completely. Tears welled, hot and silent, tracing paths down her deep brown cheeks. Inside, the doors hissed shut, and Ryan returned to his phone. Ellis straightened his tie and walked back to his office. The lobby resumed its rhythm, clicking keyboards, murmured transactions, and the soft chime of the ATM, as if she had never been there at all. Evelyn stood on the busy sidewalk for a long minute, breathing shallow, gathering her shawl. Cars honked, and pedestrians streamed past without stopping. She bent slowly, retrieved her cane and began the walk home, 5 blocks, each step heavier than the last. And what none of them knew, what the ceiling cameras had recorded in cold, unblinking silence, was that the woman they had just humiliated was Evelyn Hayes, and mother of United States Senator Jamal Hayes. And the reckoning was only hours away, and the lobby of First National Bank on Peachtree Street felt colder than the air conditioning alone could explain. Evelyn Hayes stood at counter 3, and her deep brown hands resting lightly on the marble edge, passbook open between them like an unspoken promise. And she had waited patiently while Ryan Thompson finished a text message, his thumbs flying across the screen. When he finally looked up, his pale blue eyes narrowed, and not with curiosity, but with instant dismissal. Ryan was 28, fair-skinned, blonde hair clipped short, the kind of young man who wore his bank polo like armor. And he scanned Evelyn in one practiced glance, the faded floral dress with its careful mends, the thin gray shawl, the wooden cane propped against her hip, and the rich darkness of her skin that seemed to absorb the fluorescent light rather than reflect it. His mouth twisted. "Mom," he said, and voice carrying just enough to reach the next 3 people in line. "We don't do handouts here. This is a real bank." Evelyn lifted her chin a fraction, and, "I'm not asking for a handout, young man. I'd like to make a withdrawal. $50,000 cash. My passbook is right here." Ryan didn't touch it, and instead he leaned back on his stool and laughed, a short, barking sound that bounced off the high ceiling. 50,000, and in cash. He turned halfway toward the teller beside him, a white woman who pretended to be busy with receipts. "You hear this, and she thinks she's got 50 grand sitting in here. I've had this account for 23 years, Evelyn said quietly. "Direct deposits, savings certificates, everything, and, please just look." Ryan's laugh sharpened. He finally picked up the passbook, but only to flip it open and glance at the cover before tossing it back toward her. "And, look at you. That dress looks like it's been through a war. And that skin." He shook his head, voice dropping into mock pity. "Dirty old thing, aren't you? And coming in here looking like a beggar off the street. Your kind doesn't keep money like that in places like this. You're wasting my time." And the word, dirty, landed heaviest. It wasn't just an insult, it was a verdict. Evelyn felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. "That's not kind, son. And all I need is my money." Ryan's face hardened. "Kind, I'm being honest. People like you wander in, waste everybody's day, then expect us to play along. And get out before I call security for real." A white man in a golf shirt spots back muttered, "Just leave, lady," loud enough for others to nod. And a white woman in linen clutched her designer purse and stepped farther away, as though proximity might contaminate her. And the commotion finally pulled David Ellis from his glass office. 52, pale, neatly bearded, tie knotted with corporate precision, and he walked with the confidence of someone who had never once questioned his place in any room. He stopped beside Ryan's window, arms folded. "And what's the holdup?" Ellis asked. Ryan jerked a thumb at Evelyn. "This one wants 50 grand cash. Claims she's a regular. Look at her, sir. Dirty dress, beggar vibes. And she's scamming or delusional." Ellis studied Evelyn the way one might inspect a stain on carpet. His lip curled. "Mom, this branch serves legitimate customers, and you're disrupting operations. Leave now." "I am a legitimate customer," Evelyn said. Her voice trembled for the first time. "My passbook." Ellis cut her off. "And, I'm not touching that book. You don't look like anyone who belongs here." He raised his voice. "Security." 2 guards appeared within seconds, and the white one took Evelyn's left arm without hesitation. The black guard hesitated a heartbeat before gripping the right. They pulled, and Evelyn's cane slipped from her fingers and rolled across the marble with a hollow clatter. She tried to steady herself, but the sudden yank threw her off balance, and her knees buckled as they dragged her toward the exit. At the threshold, one guard pushed, firm and personal. Evelyn stumbled forward, and catching the glass doorframe with one hand. Her other palm hit the sidewalk first, then her knees. The concrete bit into her skin through the thin fabric of her dress, and tears came then hot, silent, tracing slow paths down her deep brown cheeks. She stayed on her knees for several seconds, breathing shallow, gathering the strength to rise, and behind her, the doors hissed shut. Inside, Ryan was already back on his phone. Ellis straightened his tie and returned to his office. The lobby music, soft jazz, and picked up where it had left off. Transactions continued. Whispers faded. Evelyn pushed herself up slowly, retrieved her cane, adjusted her shawl. 5 blocks home, and each step heavier than the last. The Atlanta sun beat down, indifferent. What the ceiling cameras had recorded in merciless detail, and what no one inside had bothered to consider, was that the woman they had just reduced to tears on the sidewalk was Evelyn Hayes, and mother of United States Senator Jamal Hayes. And tomorrow, the bank will learn what real power looked like, and the 5 blocks from Peachtree Street to Evelyn Hayes's modest bungalow on Auburn Avenue felt like 50. Each step jarred her bruised knees, and the concrete had left raw scrapes beneath the thin fabric of her floral dress. Her wooden cane tapped unevenly now, and the rhythm broken by the weight of what had just happened. The Atlanta sun hung high and merciless, turning the sidewalk into a slow oven, but the real heat burned inside her chest, a quiet, deep ache that had nothing to do with the weather. She unlocked the front door with trembling fingers, and stepped into the cool dimness of her living room, and closed it behind her, as though sealing out the world, and the house smelled faintly of lemon polish, and the lavender sachet she kept in the linen drawer, small comforts that usually steadied her, and today they only made the silence louder. Evelyn set her cane against the arm of the old recliner, lowered herself onto the faded floral cushion, and let her handbag slide to the floor. For a long moment she sat motionless, hands folded in her lap, staring at the framed photograph on the mantel, and her and Jamal at his law school graduation, both of them beaming, her arm around his waist, his mortarboard tilted just so. He had been 25 then, and she had been 49 and already widowed. That day she had whispered to him, "You're going to change things, baby. Just remember who you came from." Now, and at 74, she felt the distance between that promise and this morning's humiliation like a chasm. The tears came without warning, slow at first, then faster, and spilling over the deep brown curves of her cheeks and dripping onto the collar of her dress. She didn't sob aloud. Evelyn had never been one for loud grief, and instead she wept the way she had learned to do most things in her life, quietly, thoroughly, alone. Her shoulders shook, her breath hitched, and she pressed a palm to her mouth as though to hold the sound inside, but the hurt kept rising anyway. They had called her dirty. A beggar. You're kind. And the words looped in her mind, each one sharper than the last. She had felt their eyes, the teller's sneer, the manager's cold appraisal, and the customers stepping away as though her very presence dirtied the marble floor. And the guard's hands on her arms, pulling, pushing, and until her knees met the sidewalk and the world tilted. She had not raised her voice. She had not cursed. She had simply asked for what was hers, and after several minutes the crying eased into shallow breaths. Evelyn wiped her face with the edge of her shawl, smoothed the fabric across her lap, and then reached for the cordless phone on the side table. Her thumb hovered over the speed dial button labeled Jamal. For a long beat. She hated to bother him, and he was in Washington most weeks, committee hearings, floor votes, late-night strategy sessions, and the news called him a rising force, a voice for the forgotten. She read every article, clicked the good ones, tucked them into a scrapbook she kept in the hall closet, and she never wanted to be the thing that pulled him away from that work. But today the ache was too big to carry alone. She pressed the button. The line rang twice, and, "Mama." Jamal's voice came through warm and immediate, the way it always did when he saw her name on the screen. "You okay?" "I was just about to call you," and Evelyn swallowed. I'm not okay, baby." A pause. The background noise on his end muffled voices, the clack of keyboards, and faded as though he had stepped into a quieter room. "What happened?" She told him. Not in a rush, not with anger. She spoke slowly, fact by fact: the bank, and the teller's laugh, the manager's dismissal, the guard's hands, the fall on the sidewalk. She left out nothing except how deeply the words had cut. She didn't need to, and Jamal would hear it in the quiet spaces between her sentences. When she finished, the line was silent for so long she thought the call had dropped. And, "Mama," he said at last, voice low and tight. "They thought I didn't belong," she whispered. "Because of how I look, because of my skin," and another silence. Then softer. "I'm so sorry. I should have gone with you. You were busy. I didn't want to trouble you. It was only 50,000, and, for my heart pills, and to help the Millers down the street. Their little boy's surgery." "Mama, stop." His tone sharpened with the protective edge she knew so well. "And you don't apologize for needing what's yours. And you don't walk into places alone when people still treat you like that. Not anymore. She heard him exhale, and slow and controlled. I'm coming home tonight. First flight I can get. Tomorrow morning we're going back to that bank together, and they're going to look you in the eye and see exactly who you are. And who I am. No discussion. I love you. I'll text you the arrival time. Try to rest and eat something. I'll handle the rest. The call ended. Evelyn set the phone down and leaned back in the recliner. The tears had dried, the ache remained, but now it had company, something fiercer, something hopeful. She looked again at the graduation photo. Her boy had kept his promise. Tomorrow, and the bank would learn just how well he had kept it. Outside, the neighborhood settled into late afternoony children laughing 2 houses down, a lawn mower starting up, and cicadas rising in the heat. Inside, Evelyn closed her eyes and waited for morning. The next morning broke clear and hot over Atlanta, and the kind of southern sun that promised no mercy. At Highway 27, and 2 black SUVs with tinted windows and government plates eased to the curb outside First National Bank's Peachtree branch, and 4 members of Senator Jamal Hayes' security detail stepped out first, darced earpieces, eyes scanning every angle. They formed a loose perimeter at the entrance, and hands resting near holsters, silent but unmistakable. Jamal emerged from the second vehicle in a tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt open at the collar, and Senate pin glinting on his lapel. His dark sunglasses masked the storm in his eyes. Beside him walked Evelyn Hayes, still in the same faded floral dress from yesterday, and her gray shawl draped carefully, wooden cane tapping the pavement with quiet determination. She held her son's arm, not for support, but for solidarity, and her deep brown face carried no trace of yesterday's tears, only a calm that had been forged long before this moment. They crossed the threshold together, and the lobby froze mid-breath. Conversations died. Keyboards went silent. A white woman in a pastel blouse lowered her phone halfway to her ear, and a man in khakis stepped back from the ATM as though the machine had suddenly grown teeth. At counter 3, Ryan Thompson looked up from his screen, saw Evelyn, saw Jamal, and the color drained from his face in a single visible rush. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out, and David Ellis emerged from his glass office at the commotion, adjusting his tie with automatic confidence. He took 3 steps into the open floor, and saw the security detail fanning out, saw Jamal's tall frame and unmistakable profile, saw Evelyn standing beside him with quiet dignity, and stopped dead, and his pale skin flushed red, then blanched white. Sweat beaded instantly at his temples. Jamal removed his sunglasses, folded them slowly, and slipped them into his breast pocket. His voice carried without effort, calm and precise, the tone he used on Senate floors when the cameras were rolling. And, "Good morning," he said to the room at large. Then, directly to Ryan. "And, I'd like to make a withdrawal from this account." He set Evelyn's passbook on the counter with deliberate care. $50,000 in cash. Now, and Ryan's hands shook as he reached for the book. He opened it, fingers fumbling. The screen behind him lit up with the account details. Balance $3,047, 847, and source notes scrolled past, decades of payroll deposits from the school district, where Evelyn had taught 3rd grade for 32 years, and careful investments in municipal bonds, proceeds from the sale of family land in rural Georgia, a modest inheritance from her late husband. And at the top of the screen, and in bold, account holder, Evelyn Hayes. Ryan's eyes flicked to the name, then to Evelyn, then to Jamal. Recognition hit like a physical blow. He swallowed hard. And, Senator Hayes. Jamal didn't smile. "That's my mother standing beside me. The same woman your security dragged out of here yesterday. The same woman you called dirty, and a beggar. Your kind. The same woman you watched fall to her knees on the sidewalk, while you went back to scrolling your phone." And the lobby was so quiet the hum of the air vents sounded loud. Ellis stepped forward, palms raised in a placating gesture. "Senator, sir, we had no idea, and it was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Jamal repeated, the word flat and cold. "You looked at my mother, 74 years old, lifelong taxpayer, and pillar of her community, and decided she didn't belong because of her skin color and her dress. You didn't check the passbook. You didn't ask for ID. You didn't listen, and you judged. And then you humiliated her in front of everyone here." Evelyn placed a gentle hand on her son's forearm. "Jamal," she murmured. "Nuff," and he glanced down at her, softened for a fraction of a second, then returned his gaze to Ellis and Ryan. I'm not here for apologies, Jamal said, and I'm here so every person in this room understands what happened and what happens next. Withdraw the cash. Then we'll discuss the rest. And Ryan's fingers flew across the keyboard, hands trembling so badly he had to retype the amount twice. And a senior teller appeared with a cash drawer and began counting stacks of $100 bills into an envelope. The lobby remained hushed, and even the security detail stood motionless, watchful. When the envelope was sealed and handed to Evelyn, and she accepted it with a small nod of thanks to the teller who had counted it, not to Ryan, not to Ellis. She tucked it into her handbag, and Jamal turned to face the room fully now. This isn't just about my mother, he said. This is about every black elder, and every person who walks in here and gets treated like they're invisible or criminal, because they don't match someone's idea of who belongs. Yesterday, and you made that choice. Today you live with the consequences. He looked at Ellis. I've already spoken to your regional director. An investigation starts this afternoon, and full review of this branch's practices. Mandatory training on racial bias and customer dignity for every employee. And I expect a personal report on progress within 30 days. Ellis could only nod, throat working. Jamal offered his arm to Evelyn again. She took it, and together they walked toward the doors, security detail falling in behind them like a quiet honor guard. At the threshold, Evelyn paused. She turned back and looked straight at Ryan and Ellis, and spoke for the first time since entering. I forgive you, she said simply. But don't forget, and then she stepped out into the sunlight, her son at her side, the envelope of cash a small weight in her bag, the weight in her heart already lighter. Behind them, and the lobby stayed silent long after the doors closed. The envelope of cash rested safely in Evelyn Hayes' handbag, but the air in the First National Bank lobby still crackled with tension. Senator Jamal Hayes stood at the center of the frozen space, and his tall frame casting a long shadow across the marble floor. The security detail formed a quiet semicircle behind him, and his mother, 4 men and women in dark suits, and faces impassive, eyes alert. Every customer, every teller, every loan officer had stopped moving. The only sound was the soft whir of the ceiling vents and the faint and nervous breathing of Ryan Thompson and David Ellis. Jamal removed his phone from his pocket and placed it on the counter face up, and the screen showed an active call to the bank's regional executive vice president, already on speaker, the man's voice thin and anxious through the tiny speaker. And, Senator Hayes, the executive began, we're deeply. Jamal raised a hand, silencing him without looking away from Ryan and Ellis. This isn't a negotiation, he said, and voice steady and low, the same measured cadence he used when addressing hostile committees in Washington. What happened here yesterday wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, and a deliberate, repeated choice to judge my mother, 74 years old, black, dressed simply, by her skin color and her clothes. You saw her deep brown skin, and her faded dress, her cane, and decided she was a beggar. Dirty. You didn't check her account. You didn't ask questions. You humiliated her. And you had her dragged out and thrown to the sidewalk in front of witnesses. And you did it because you assumed she didn't belong. He turned slowly to face the entire lobby, and white faces stared back, some flushed with shame, others pale with fear. A few black customers in line stood straighter, arms folded, eyes fixed on Jamal. And that assumption, he continued, is racial bias. Plain and simple. It's profiling. It's the same bias that follows black people into stores, restaurants, neighborhoods, and yes, banks every single day. My mother has paid taxes longer than most of you have been alive. She taught 3 generations of children in Georgia public schools, and she saved every penny she earned. And yesterday, you reduced her to nothing, because she didn't look the way you think a wealthy person should look. And Jamal's gaze locked on Ryan first. The young teller's hands gripped the edge of counter so tightly his knuckles were white. You laughed at her? Jamal said, and you mocked her skin. You called her dirty in front of strangers. Effective immediately, you are suspended without pay. Pending the outcome of a full investigation, and your employment here will be terminated. Ryan's mouth opened, but no words came. He looked like a man watching his future collapse in real time. Jamal shifted to Ellis. And you, Mr. Ellis, you're the manager. You had the authority to stop it. You escalated it. You ordered security to remove her. You told her she didn't belong. And you are also suspended without pay, effective now. The same investigation will determine whether criminal charges for assault or civil rights violations are warranted, and Ellis's lips moved soundlessly. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. Jamal addressed the room again, and I've already instructed regional leadership to launch a comprehensive review of this branch's practices, every interaction, every complaint, and every pattern of differential treatment based on race, appearance, or perceived class. This isn't optional. And starting next week, every employee here, every single one, and will complete mandatory anti-racism training and implicit bias education, not the watered-down online modules. Real, in-person sessions with accountability measures. And progress reports will come directly to my Senate office every 30 days for the next year. If standards aren't met, heads will roll higher up the chain. He paused, and letting the words settle. This isn't punishment for punishment's sake, he said. This is correction. Because what you did to my mother yesterday, and you've likely done to others, quietly, without cameras, without consequences. Today that ends. From now on, every person who walks through these doors, black, white, brown, and young, old, rich, poor, gets treated with the dignity they deserve. Not because of who their son is, because of who they are. Evelyn touched his arm lightly, and, Jamal, she murmured, that's enough. He looked down at her, the hard lines of his face softening for a moment. Then he nodded. We're done here? He said to the room, and he offered his arm. Evelyn took it. Together they walked toward the exit, security detail falling in step behind them. As the glass doors opened, sunlight poured in, and framing them in gold. Behind them, the lobby remained silent. Ryan stared at the floor. Ellis leaned against a pillar, breathing shallow, and a black woman in line wiped her eyes quietly. A white teller swallowed hard and looked away. Outside, Jamal helped his mother into the SUV. Before the door closed, and Evelyn glanced back at the bank one last time. They heard you, baby, she said softly. Jamal squeezed her hand. I hope so, Mama. For everyone's sake. And the convoy pulled away, leaving the branch to reckon with the morning it would never forget, and the glass doors of First National Bank closed behind Senator Jamal Hayes and his mother with a soft pneumatic sigh. Inside, and the lobby remained suspended in a hush so thick it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. Ryan Thompson stood frozen at his counter, and hands still trembling from the withdrawal he had just processed. David Ellis leaned against the pillar near his office door, shirt damp with sweat and face the color of old parchment. Customers who had witnessed the entire exchange stared at one another, some with wide eyes, others with quiet nods of recognition, and Evelyn paused on the threshold, one hand on Jamal's arm, the other clutching the envelope of cash. She turned back slowly, her deep brown eyes sweeping the room, and not with anger but with something gentler, something almost maternal. The security detail halted behind her, respectful. Jamal, she said quietly, and her voice carrying just enough to reach every corner of the silent lobby. That's enough, baby. Jamal looked down at her, the steel in his posture softening. Mama, and they need to. They heard you, she interrupted gently. They saw me. They know who I am now. She glanced at Ryan, then at Ellis, then at the faces behind them, white and black, young, old. Let them learn. Jamal exhaled long and slow. He nodded once. Okay, Mama. Evelyn offered the room one last small, steady smile, and the same smile she had given her third-grade students when they finally understood a difficult lesson. Then she stepped through the doors into the bright Atlanta sunlight, and her son at her side, the convoy waiting. Inside, the silence lingered another full minute before someone coughed. A teller restarted her computer, and a customer shuffled forward to the next window. But something had shifted in the air, subtle yet irreversible, like the first crack in winter ice. Over the following weeks, and the change was quiet at first, then unmistakable, Ryan Thompson returned to a 2-week unpaid suspension with red-rimmed eyes and a new habit, and he looked every customer in the face, said good morning, with genuine warmth, and never once glanced at clothing or skin before offering help. David Ellis, and back after 30 days and intensive retraining, implemented the new protocols himself, daily huddles on dignity and bias awareness, and role-playing sessions where staff practiced greeting people who didn't look like they belonged. The mandatory anti-racism and implicit bias training sessions stretched into months, and with guest speakers from local civil rights organizations. Progress reports went to Senator Hayes' office every 30 days, as promised, and word spread slowly through Atlanta's neighborhoods. A black woman in her 60s told her church group how the teller now smiled and asked her name, and a young Latino man mentioned the manager personally apologizing when he sensed hesitation at the counter. Customers who had once felt invisible began to feel seen, and complaints of differential treatment dropped sharply. The branch's internal metrics, customer satisfaction scores, climbed steadily, and beyond the walls of that single location, the incident rippled outward. A local news station picked up the story after a whistleblower shared security footage, and the segment aired during the evening news. Senator's mother humiliated at bank leads to sweeping policy changes. Social media threads followed, and community forums discussed everyday racism in places people assumed were neutral. Banks across the region quietly reviewed their own training programs, and a National Banking Association referenced the case in a diversity webinar. Small acts of awareness grew into larger conversations. Evelyn never sought the spotlight, and she returned to her quiet life on Auburn Avenue, tending her small garden, visiting neighbors, attending Wednesday Bible study. But every few months, a letter would arrive from the bank. Thank yous from staff who had completed the training, and notes from customers whose experiences had improved because of what happened that day. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold and rose, and Evelyn sat on her front porch with Jamal. He had flown in for the weekend. "You were right," he said, watching fireflies blink in the yard, and letting them learn was stronger than any punishment. She patted his hand. People change when they see themselves clearly. Not when they're just afraid, and Jamal smiled faintly. "Still wish I'd made them sweat a little more." Evelyn chuckled softly. They sweated enough. Now they're working on their hearts, and the story of that morning in the bank became a quiet legend in certain circles, not one of vengeance, but of dignity reclaimed and lessons learned, and it reminded anyone who heard it never judge a person by their skin color, their clothes, or their appearance. True worth lies deeper, in character, in resilience, and in the heart that refuses to be diminished. Because the tables can turn in an instant. The woman you push aside today might be the one whose son returns tomorrow, and not with anger alone, but with the quiet power to make the world see differently. And sometimes the greatest justice isn't in the fall, it's in the rise that follows.